Hey guys, today we're going to be trying to answer the question, is Elemental Shaman worth playing in 10.2? So first and foremost, the easy answer to that question is if you enjoy playing Elemental Shaman, if you like having a build that's based around pressing Lava Burst a whole lot, if you like spreading out those Flame Shocks and duplicating Lava Burst on all of those targets with Primordial Wave and with DRE, then you're going to have a great time in 10.2. It'll definitely be a lot of fun because it's very visually appealing, having those Lava Bursts go all over the place, proccing Ascendants and stuff like that. So this will be the build for you if you like those things. On top of that, at pretty much every level in the game, you'll be able to accomplish your goals of either getting like Cutting Edge or pushing like into 20s with Mythic Plus or something like that. Ellie is fully capable of clearing all of the highest forms of content, but we will get into some of those issues that it will have moving on. I just want to make sure it's perfectly clear that if you want to play Elemental, then just make it work for you, because it can accomplish pretty much anything in the game, and there's nothing that's making it like, you know, dog tier. So with that being said, we'll get a little bit more in the nitty gritty, but if you want to play it, then don't let anyone stop you from playing it otherwise. But that being said, it does have issues. It does have bonuses and negatives to it, so we'll go ahead and get into that, and we'll start off with rating first. So starting off with rating, the build that we're probably going to be using is some variation of this build for almost all situations, except for like the first boss. The first boss is honestly, I made a little tier list of how I think Ellie's going to do on each of these bosses. Honestly, the first boss, Gnarl Root, is probably our worst boss in the entire raid, which is fine because it's the first boss. We can kind of get it out of the way first. But every other boss, I think, will be fairly good for us. I don't really know about Fyrak. It could be really anywhere here. We never got a chance to test it, but I'm just going to throw it in A for right now. I think we'll do really well on bosses like Council of Dreams and Agira because of our ability to do spread cleave. Agira with the spears that we have to cleave down, and then Council of Dreams, which is just a persistent target fight for the entirety of the fight, and one of those targets is almost always going to be away from the other two. The rest of these bosses, like Nimue, is essentially always a single target boss. Laredar has adds, but they're kind of coming at individual like sets of time. We can do fairly good damage on that as well, but it is not necessarily going to be hard for anyone else to be doing it either. It's not really spread cleave in that situation. Volcross and Smolderon are both pure single target fights as well. Tindral, I can't really get a good sense of from the testing that we did. It could easily be A tier for us, but I'm putting it in B right now, just because of the fact that after you phase into the second phase, you have to beat down a shield, and we don't really have a cooldown to plan around with that. So I'm kind of putting it in B tier, but as far as the bosses go, I had no issue keeping up with damage on any of these bosses. Now, I wish I had some footage of my raid testing to show you, but unfortunately, I seem to have misplaced all of my PTR footage for raid. I mean, that's how it goes sometimes. But I did do all of the testing for all the bosses, and I was able to keep up on every single fight. So just keep that in mind. Outside of Gnarl Root, this will be the build, or some version of it, that we will be using pretty much for every single fight. If there's any kind of cleave at all, except maybe outside of Council, we can then just move this point over here and move it into Liquid Magma Totem, and that gives us an ability to quickly spread our Flame Shocks. This is really good for like bosses like Agira or Laredar, where you have adds that will spawn. You put down your your Liquid Magma Totem and immediately spread those Flame Shocks, and you can immediately go into your Primordial Wave. And that'll be the big thing that you'll be planning around for those bosses, is making sure that you're ready for that Primordial Wave and Liquid Magma Totem to spread those Flame Shocks out really quickly, and then you can instantly get into your damage. So not a whole lot of setup time for bosses like Laredar or Agira or even Council. Like all of those bosses, I think will do very well on, and it's very easy to then just take your pure single target build, just move one talent point over to help get that Flame Shock spread if you need it. For the single target bosses, we'll be using a build something similar to this one, as I said, and it might seem a little bit like weird. I know some of you are probably groaning seeing Ice Fury in here, but it's really not that big of a deal. The way it plays is very similar to Season 1, where even though we have Ice Fury, it's not in any way a goal of the build. We just kind of use it to get Maelstrom, and when we don't have Lava Bursts to use, outside of that, we're just pretty much Lava Bursting every time it's up, only pressing Spinders when we don't have any Lava Burst to press for the most part. You don't really want to overcap, but if you if you have a Ascendance, you're always going to be pressing Lava Burst. You're not going to worry about overcapping if you're in Ascendance. Outside of that, your just main focus is to just be pressing Lava Burst all the time, as much as you possibly can, and you're not worrying about the roll of Ice Fury. You can just kind of leave it on cooldown, or leave it off cooldown, if you have Lava Burst to spend. You don't have to think about it that much. You just have to press Lava Burst over and over and over again until you have nothing left. And if you have nothing left, then you're pressing Ice Fury, then you're pressing Lightning Bolt. Hopefully you never get in a position where you're pressing Lightning Bolt. I haven't pressed it once during this little show off, like right here. But if you run out of Ice Fury charges, then you would press it. But for the most part, you're just pressing Lava Burst. That is your main goal. It is a true priority system. There are no questions of if certain things are in line or whatnot. If you have like a certain like lineup to things, you don't have to worry about damage windows or anything like that. It's simply press Lava Burst if it's there. Try not to cap unless you're in Ascendance, and then you just press Lava Burst. And that's pretty much it. So a breakdown of your damage will end up looking something like this. I didn't press Lightning Bolt in a single time in there. Frost Shocks were only as a filler if I didn't have a Lava Burst to press. Very, very simple playstyle. All about the Lava Burst all the time. And most of your damage will be coming from that. So if that kind of playstyle is something that's interesting to you, go for it. Definitely less involved than Season 2 was. You don't have to think about much at all with this. That can be a really big positive, especially when you're trying to do mechanics, so you're not having to worry about lining things up. You do have a good amount of movement with your Lava Surge procs, though you can't really plan it around that too much because you're getting those Lava Surge procs for the most part fairly randomly outside of your Lava Surges or your Primordial Surges. So you will have to kind of like stutter step a lot. Every time you get a instant cast spell, you can have a chance to move a little bit. So you do have that, as well as obviously your Spirit Walker's Grace. So it is a very much easier build to play than what we were dealing with in Season 2. Very, very Lava Burst heavy, very much like Season 1, and very much plays around Primordial Wave. So if that's something that appeals to you, I think Ellie will actually, even after all the nerfs to the tier, I think Ellie will still end up in a fairly good spot overall. I was really worried that getting those tier nerfs without any kind of compensation buffs was really going to hurt us, but in the small amount of testing we did after those nerfs went in, we were not nearly in as bad of a spot as I thought we were going to be for Raid specifically. I wish I had still had the footage of those, but it is what it is. I was performing fairly well, and obviously, anecdotal evidence of just like an hour's worth of testing or 2 hours worth of testing does not tell the whole story, but it is worth saying that it felt fine. It still plays the exact same. We're just doing a little bit less damage in that cleave scenario. And we were doing way more damage in Cleave. The tier set needed to be nerfed, especially for Cleave. We were far and away the best spread Cleave class in the game. Like, not even close. Like, no one was touching us, especially like on a boss like Council with 3 targets. Low target Cleave, especially spread Cleave, Ellie was just beyond busted. So we're actually in a spot where we're more balanced now with every other class. And I think from what I've been seeing that Ellie should do fine in single target as well. We'll just see how it plays out as we move forward, but I think Ellie should be safe for Raid. Again, the biggest issue, the big elephant in the room for Elemental Shaman in a Raid environment is obviously we don't bring a Raid buff. That's obviously going to hurt our case in some situations, but as long as you can play well, you should be a welcome addition to any raid group. You might just have to sell yourself a little bit and show what you're able to do. And that's a part of that community perception. You might not get that chance depending on what circles you run in a pug environment. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work or how much of a pariah we might end up being because we don't have a raid buff. And especially when it's getting tighter and tighter with how many raid buffs they're giving out to other classes, but not to Ellie, not to Resto. So it could be a big issue. It might not be, but as far as a damage perspective goes, Ellie should be fine. I'm not really too worried about it from a raid perspective. So again, if you enjoy this kind of play style, if you enjoy lots of lava bursts, then this will be a spec for you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Mythic Plus, where I actually do have some footage to show you with that. So starting off with the builds for Mythic Plus, I do kind of believe that this is going to be the only real good build across all situations in Mythic Plus, which is kind of a good thing. It's nice to not having to worry about certain situations, having to switch builds. This one just kind of covers it all. There's a couple other builds I have seen being used out there, people experimenting with, coming down and either getting Lightning Rod or Stormkeeper, but the problem with those kind of builds, or even like the Further Beyond build, even though it's been nerfed into the ground, they're just giving up too much either on the side of AoE or in single target. This does a good job of preserving a good amount of AoE damage without losing much single target either. So this is really a good all-around build that is good in pretty much every kind of target count and situation as far as Ellie is concerned. As far as what Ellie can really do, this is kind of the most all-around build that we really have access to. So the way that this plays is very similar actually to how it works in single target, even with that completely different build, because again, we're mainly just focusing on Lava Burst. So just for the AoE portion of things, we're going to be spreading out our Flame Shocks with our Liquid Magma Totem and Flame Shock, and then we're basically just going to be pressing Lava Burst over and over and over again, and using our Earthquake if we don't have a Lava Burst to spin. You can obviously use your Chain Lightning with Stormkeeper, but outside of Stormkeeper, it's not really ever worth using your Chain Lightning. You can kind of fish if you want to for a proc of Ascendance possibly, while you have Stormkeeper active, so you can get that extra damage from Ascendance with the Lava Beam, but for the most part, it's just going to be pressing Lava Burst over and over and over again. We want to be reducing that cooldown of our Primordial Wave as quickly as possible, so that we can get it out again and just keep that loop going constantly. So the more Lava Burst we cast, the more Ascendance procs we can possibly get, and the quicker we can reduce the cooldown of Primordial Wave. And because we're using Windspeaker's Lava Resurgence, if we're in a situation where we run out of Lava Burst and then we press Earthquake, we will always have a Lava Burst, or a Lava Surge, which is even better, a Lava Surge charge after we press our Earthquake. Earthquake is not a real big portion of our damage in all of this. So if I were to stop damaging right here and pull this up, Earthquake is really not doing too much to help us out here. It's really just about that Lava Burst. So it's all about that cycle of pressing Lava Burst to get obviously our damage out with our spread from Primordial Wave, copying all of those on all those targets, plus our 4-piece set, and then also getting that cooldown reduction of Primordial Wave with Rolling Magma. So every single Lava Burst we do and every copy of Lava Burst that we get reduces the cooldown of Primordial Wave, and then reduces how quick, or it also brings back up our 4-piece set again that much faster. So it's all feeding back in to Primordial Wave and the 4 set of our new tier pieces. So all Lava Burst all the time, even in AoE, and then obviously we can here to bring that back up again. Bring one of these back up again. Here you go. It's all about Lava Burst all the time, and then obviously we can still use our Stormkeeper for that instant burst of that Chain Lightning, but outside of that, it's not really worth pressing Chain Lightning, except in very niche situations. But we still have access to that Stormkeeper, which will be useful for that big burst of damage, because that's really our only big burst outside of getting lucky with Ascendance procs in very certain situations as well. So if you like Lava Burst in dungeon environments all the time, always, then this will be a build for you. So let's talk about some of the positives for Elemental in a Mythic Plus environment. It has really good bonuses that you bring in Mythic Plus. You have an AoE stun, an AoE slow that is persistent with Earthbind Totem. You have an AoE knockback or knock up, which can be very good as just an AoE stop. You have an offensive Dispel. You have a Curse Dispel that you can talent into, a Hex that you can talent into, that gives you a hard CC if that's ever necessary, or for certain affixes like Afflicted, or not Afflicted, but Incorporeal. Gives you access to dealing with that yourself. You also have an AoE Poison Dispel, which actually will be fairly useful, especially in places like the Everbloom, where there's going to be a lot of poisons. Again, that will also help you with Afflicted. You have a very short interrupt, and there's a lot of important interrupts this season, and you have the shortest range interrupt in the game at 12 seconds. You have AG, which provides some AoE healing. It's fairly decent, not as good as like Vampiric Touch, but it's still decent damage. You have an AoE knockdown from your Earthquake. You're really good at spread cleave, and you have fairly good mobility. There is a lot of things to like about Elemental Shaman in a Mythic Plus environment, because you're not even really competing there with enhancement in terms of if you bring Wind Fury Totem or not. They're not bringing Wind Fury Totem in a Mythic Plus environment 99% of the time. So like you're kind of on even playing field there. Now obviously they get a lot of the same benefits, but Elemental has a lot to bring to a Mythic Plus environment. However, they are fairly squishy. They don't really have access to good burst like on demand outside of Stormkeeper. And one of the biggest things that I haven't talked about yet is they have horrible mass AoE, especially when mixed with low health minions. So one thing I want to bring attention to is like, especially like the perfect situation of this horrible mass AoE with like mixed in with small low health adds is like this gauntlet in the end of Blackrock Hold, where you have all of these little bats all over the place, but then there are two very important mobs, or sometimes three, depending on how big your tank is pulling, that need to be focused down. And these bats need to be killed because they also will be focusing on certain people. They have a fixate that will focus on someone and they will destroy them if they get it up to them. While some classes have nice passive AoE, like obviously like Vengeance or like Havoc Demon Hunter, Elemental has to actually set up their AoE. And if these little small adds die too quickly, then your flame shocks are being eaten up and you're not able to do real AoE. So your damage in this gauntlet is going to be abysmal outside of the small amount of time that you have burst from your Stormkeeper Chain Lightning, which feels even more like just kind of like padding than anything else, because you're not really helping then with your damage on the main target. You still want to be cleaving off of these two big targets, but it's just so hard to do that and then also provide any kind of real help for the little bats around it. Any kind of small adds like this, Ellie is going to do very, very poor damage. And any kind of mass AoE in general, Ellie is going to struggle to keep up with. And that's the thing that I'm like really worried about for Ellie, is just the mass AoEs, the lack of burst, and the squishiness of the class itself. It's going to be possibly very unfun for the player, with just the fact that you just feel like kind of helpless in those situations. Again, in medium-sized pulls that live a decent amount of time, once you get set up, you can absolutely carry as a damage dealer. It's just in some situations, and especially with mass pulls, it can be very difficult for Elemental Shaman to really pull its weight. And lastly, one thing that I want to talk about that I think is actually going to be very important for a lot of you guys that are in the pug world out there is going to be community perception. And if you look around with tier lists, which seem to be very popular as always, it's very important to see where people are listing Elemental, especially in comparison to Enhanced, which I will get into why that matters in a second. But across the board, Ellie is being looked at as just kind of a lesser spec for the most part, typically towards the bottom of most people's tier lists, and more importantly, Enhance also being well above it. Obviously, you have like people like Max who puts Ellie in a spec where it just is the only one that brings a raid buff as opposed to pretty much every other class in the game. So one of the things that I really want to bring up in those situations, especially when it comes to community perception, is that if you're in the pug world, that is going to matter, because this happened to me in Season 1. I did a ton of pugging in Season 1, and there would be so many times where I'd be invited and then immediately kicked after they found out that I wasn't playing Enhance. Enhance is looking to be really good, and there's nothing wrong with Enhance doing good. I want to make sure that's clear. I'm not calling for Enhance to be nerfed. I'm calling for Ellie to be brought up to that same level, because especially in 10.2, I believe they've talked about it several times, though I haven't seen it yet. When you're going to be inviting people into your groups for 10.2, I believe there's going to be a feature that will actually show what spec they're in. So unlike in my situation in Season 1, you probably just won't be invited in some situations that when they see that you're playing like an Elemental Shaman, especially if the community's perception is, if it carries over into the patch proper. Like, after, obviously tier lists are one thing, but once people have started seeing how people are performing, if Ellie is kind of decided as a community is just not capable of doing the damage, or people are just not willing to take the chance on it, and you're not playing Enhance, then Ellie could be in an even worse spot. Even if you're good at playing Ellie, even if you're performing well at Ellie, at the end of the day in the pug world, you're going to be ruled by that community perception. And it's very possible that Ellie will struggle to get into keys just based off of that alone. It might be considered kind of like a pariah, as just like a class, like, you don't want to invite one of those Ellies, you know, like they're terrible for keys. And especially, you know, people talk about like, you know, like what happens at the 0.01% of Mythic Plus is not a reflection at the lower ends. And while that's definitely true, we've seen, especially with augmentation, that people will clamor over getting an AUG over anything else, even in the lower key range. Even though they don't need it to time, it does still make it easier to time keys. People will look at like people not running Ellie's at super high end, or what they're saying about Ellie at a super high end, and if they're calling it shit, then when someone turns around to do your plus 12 and they're in charge of inviting the group and they see an Ellie, they might not take it. That's just a reality we live in. Obviously, Ellie's will be more than capable of timing 20s, 25s probably even. I don't know like really how hard the season is looking at this point, but it will definitely be capable of doing those things. But if you're living in that pug world where you're needing to rely on other people trusting that you'll be a good invite, it might be possible that you might be looking at waiting to get into a key for a very long time in some situations. I don't know yet. We'll see how it all turns out, but that's a big issue with community perception, especially in the pug world, that I feel like it's very important to mention. So that's pretty much it. That's kind of my thoughts. Should you play Elemental in 10.2? That's really just going to come down to how much you really enjoy it. If you're looking for something that's going to be meta, I would probably look elsewhere. But if you're looking to just have a good time, I think Ellie can be a lot of fun if you like this play style of spamming Lava Burst constantly in all situations. It's all Lava Burst all the time. One other thing I should have mentioned earlier, though, on the Mythic Plus front is one thing to keep in mind is as long as if they don't change anything else from when I'm releasing this video or from when I'm making this video, right now Havoc, Demon Hunter, and AoE Evoker have a stranglehold over 2 of the spots for like if you're pushing higher into Mythic Plus keys, which means that Ellie's really only competing for that last Mythic Plus spot. Obviously AoE, for whatever reason, Blizzard wants to have AoE be required essentially in higher keys for Mythic Plus, and Havoc Demon Hunter is doing so far beyond everyone else at the moment. In a Mythic Plus environment, you would be dumb not to bring it if your goal is to push into the high keys. So that's something to keep in mind, that you're really just competing for that last spot, and that is definitely something that's going to affect us in the pug world for sure, but just in a viability standpoint. So we're going to be competing against like Balanced Druids, which I think Balanced Druids are kind of just doing what Elemental Shaman does, but better, and also has a major damage cooldown in Incarn. They're probably going to also struggle at low keys just because they have some more setup to do than we do. But at a higher level of keys, they probably are going to be in a better place. Then you're going to have to contend with like Fire Mages and Frost Mages, and then obviously Enhance might actually be in a very good place to compete for those that last spot. So keep those things in mind. You really are kind of only competing for one spot as of right now, as of our understanding of Mythic Plus. So that's just one more thing to keep in mind there. But yeah, Elemental Shaman, I think it'll be fine in raids. I think as long as you can get into a raid environment, there's more flex spots in a raid environment, obviously. And I think Elemental is in more than a good enough place that as long as you're good at playing Elemental, you will be able to show that off and be able to do good damage and not feel like a hindrance to your raid. Obviously not bringing a raid buff, but being able to at least do mechanics and pump out decent damage. I think that will be something that you'll be able to easily accomplish on an Elemental Shaman. You don't have to worry about that too much. So that's kind of my thoughts for Elemental moving into 10.2. So again, is Elemental worth playing in 10.2? I would say yes, as long as your only goal is to have fun and you're not looking to like really compete as far as like a super high level. You're not trying to get into super high keys, but there will be elementals that will compete at the high level. So, maybe use them as a inspiration to you. You can think of it that way and then try to reach for the stars, if you will. There definitely will be elementals that will make it to the Hall of Fame or maybe even get title. It might be a little bit harder this season, but I think that I'm sure a handful of them will. So it's definitely doable if you have the friends to do it. I would just beware if you live in the pug world. So with that being said, that's pretty much it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. It helps out with the channel immensely. I also stream at twitch.tv/Ridmark, so if you're interested in that, feel free to give me a follow there. I also have a Discord if you want to ask me any questions or anything like that. Feel free to join that as well. But other than that, guys, that's pretty much it, and I will see you in the next video.